the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Hello, and welcome back to the show. We're going to dive into scandal today, when business does bad. I'm Stephen Sakach here with Tullio Siragusa, Ash Maher. Hey guys, this can be a fun one.
Yes.
So some of history's kind of greatest tragedies we know have been rightfully blamed on bad systems. You know, the madness of bureaucracy, they got lethal genocide machines, corruption. We're at a time in our history right now when our systems are being tested like never before. So we're going to cover some themes on systems coming up here, bad systems, how they kind of went sideways. So different industries and different goals. We're going to pull out some different trends. Often when you think of business scandal, you think of, hey, maybe a few bad people involved in this, you know, a couple bad apples. But sometimes it's something where thousands of people that are this cogs in this bad machine just get caught up with it. And it goes on for a very long time. So obviously with some of this, the sole focus is dollars in pockets for people, you know, but it can create a win-lose scenario, not a win-win scenario, or not a win-six like in conscious capitalism where you're talking about, you know, customers, employees, investors, vendors, etc. And I think we'll see a lot of this is chasing that dollar at all cost. We're going to dive into financial services today. Now, this might sound a little dry to people, but this has caused some serious problems, recessions and scandals and all sorts of craziness. So let's start with a recent one. I mentioned I wanted to talk about Wells Fargo. Ash, do you remember the old Wells Fargo commercial?
I don't, but I do remember the scandal.
That's perfect. So there's the younger generation right there. Tullio, do you remember the old Wells Fargo commercials?
I do, with the stagecoach wagon, and I don't remember the actual wording or the copy of the commercial, but I remember the feeling. It was a feeling of like trust and stability, and there was an enterprising feeling about it, almost like, hey, we were there from the beginning. We helped build this country. I think that was actually some of the wording. We helped build this country, something like that.
This old-timey stagecoach. We've been there a long time. We've trusted with your money for a long time. That was us growing up, right? That was kind of the feeling we had with Wells Fargo. You know, we see these commercials. That was the brand. And then
because I became a Wells Fargo customer as a result of that. I just felt like this is the guys I trust.
Yes. And then what happened to you, Tullio?
Then I jumped off that wagon pretty quickly after
you jumped off that stagecoach.
Suddenly I found a few extra accounts on my portfolio that I hadn't opened. I'm like, what's going on here? And then the whole scandal with all the overly aggressive sales branches just, you know, selling stuff that nobody even bought. And I was like, yeah, I don't think I trust these guys that much now. So let me exit it.
I'll do a recap of this. But basically is the scandal involved sales. And it was like, you've got the carrot in front of the stagecoach, right? With that, but you also got the guy whipping behind there. And that's really what's going on here is that a lot of that very aggressively within Wells Fargo. So in front of Congress, the CEO at the time acknowledged wrongful sales practice behavior and says it goes against everything regarding our core principles, our ethics, and our culture. When he said that, employees were like, does it? and the reality within Wells Fargo, it was just a different story. So there was intense pressure to meet sales quotas, created an environment where this just unethical practices flourished. So former employees described the unbearable pressure to meet sales target. One employee recounted in an NPR interview the expectation to sell at least 8 products a day, with targets sometime reaching 20 during their jump into January. So two probably caught up and jump into January promotion where they gave you a couple of.
It's a real boiler room they were running.
Yeah, but so the pressure led to this toxic work environment. some called it, grindhouse or soul crushing. And what really the other side of this, the whipping part of this, is there was extreme coaching sessions designed as one-on-ones where managers would pressure employees to meet their targets under the threat of, not being labeled a team player or ultimately fired. An employee described being marched into a conference room, locked inside, and forced to sign formal warnings about their sales performance. So despite multiple calls to their own ethics hotlines, the environment didn't improve. And this employee that called the ethics hotline was fired. But so there's so many things going on here, and it's happening actually for years and years. And leadership failed to act on these many, many whistleblower complaints within their system. The company attempted to downplay the issue by claiming it was confined to certain parts of the company. Yet at the same time, Wells Fargo faced this huge $2 billion fine in a separate issue. And they also paid $80 million back to consumers for unauthorized auto insurance. So this is rather persuasive. They weren't that stagecoach anymore, but they felt more like the bandits, I think, in this scenario. So I've got opinions on what
took over the stagecoach, probably.
I've got opinions on what went wrong here. What did they lose sight on, Tullio? What comes to mind for you?
Fascinating how it could have probably started with just a team that got creative and suddenly were able to meet their numbers. And then some other team was curious about how they did it. And it spread like wildfire, and there were no controls and no desire for controls because everybody was benefiting from the goal. So it really comes down to what drives behavior. It's what you measure that's going to drive behavior. So the big focus and aggressive stance on numbers and quota and sales caused this sort of collective disaster, and no controls, no oversight allowed it to burn like a wildfire. But it really comes down to them having lost sight of what's important. They went from being a company that was building trust with their consumers in their message and in how they treated them, to a company that became very overly aggressive on numbers and revenue. And it's like they just kind of lost their way somewhere along the line there. But the North Star is always take care of the customer. So that's where I think they failed. They forgot to take care of the customer. They looked at the customer as a vehicle to get to meeting those metrics, which was all about me making my quota, making my number, making my money. Where's the customer in that equation? Doesn't exist. The customer is just a vehicle, a product to get to what I need. So usually there's an equation that makes these things go off the rails, which is forgetting sight of what's really important, which is to take care of your customers.
Yeah, Ash, I mean, you think about it, it's like throughout this process, there was nothing that said what's in the customer's best interest here, right? There's no KPI that said customer satisfaction or happiness about this solution that they were magically given, like Tullio had appearing at his doorstep.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to just piggyback off of what Tullio shared, it's interesting. I recall my parents' accounts being affected. And the big factor that I remember the big theme that I remember was that the lack of trust that everyone had for Wells Fargo. So even today, I can't tell you the exact details because I don't recall them. Nor did I dig into
this is your impression.
Right. My impression is that I don't trust you. Now, what's crazy is that when I personally, now this is me personally, I can imagine as other people, my generation younger, when I see Wells Fargo, I see the colors, I see the code, I don't trust it because my only memory is the fact that it affected and it hurt my family and the fact that we all lost trust. So for me to ever do banking with Wells Fargo, they would have to completely become a different company, rename, rebrand. Like that's how low and that's how much of a customer they lost in myself, right? I'm never going to work with Wells Fargo the way they are, just because that's the lasting impression they left. So I can only imagine how many other individuals like myself who may not have been directly affected, but maybe they had family members, friends, someone they watched the news. Now all they can associate with just the brand is distrust. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah, they got to dig out of that hole. Tullio, what are some of the things that they're trying to do or they did in response to this?
I mean, they did some good things. Ultimately, I didn't completely exit. I still actually maintain a smaller relationship with them. But to Ash's point, they're not my primary bank because of that. So that's very hard to get past when you've been betrayed like that. So they did some remediation. They took some remediation steps in response to all this. First, they eliminated all the sales goals. That was probably the best thing they could have done. They ended its sales goals for the retail banking and focused instead on customer service and ethical banking practices. Good metric to have in place. Judge your people on that, then you're going to have better quality. They made some leadership changes. Now, oddly enough, the CEO retired, but he retired with a $137 million severance package. So it was kind of like, hey, thanks for messing us up. Here's a nice little parting gift,
Well,
but
his best interests were met, right?
It doesn't matter. It's like even if you mess up the consumer's trust, you still get paid. So go figure that out. But in any case, they did make some changes in the executive ranks. They've also improved monitoring and controls so that they can increase oversight on sales practices, stricter controls to detect and prevent fraudulent activities. They went and also put in place some good customer remediation strategies for all the customers that were affected, and more employee training on ethics, good ethical behavior, and customer first practices. I mean, this was kind of a sign of like group collective intelligence in the wrong direction. I mean, it's mind blowing how big and wide this was. So the transformation required retraining, retooling the whole team from how they thought about things.
To get that many people doing that same thing, and maybe some questioning it, but some just going along, it feels like that should be hard to do, but we see so many instances where it's actually just not because of that herd mentality, I think you're saying.
I mean, it's herd mentality. And the truth is, you could be the nicest person on the planet, most caring person on the planet. If you're in the wrong culture, it will change you because you need to survive. You adjust to survive. And sadly, that's what happened. So another thing they did is they took steps to increase transparency and accountability in their operation by having regular reporting on progress. I mean, what's mind-blowing to me is that this stuff came after this happened. Yeah, this should be in place to begin with.
It's like
it's good governance that you should have in place to run your business.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Like Ash, I think about that. What Tullio just said is, if you really, so the CEO said this goes against everything regarding our core principles, our ethics, our culture. Well, if it did, why weren't you doing all those things that we've just listed? Why were they afterthoughts? So I don't know, what lessons can be learned here?
It goes back to core values. And I think a lot of times, from my thoughts on this, is that certain CEOs are really just the puppets of whoever's above them, right? The shareholders or whoever is controlling what the goals and the North Star is in that time, right? So when a CEO is given a task or a job based on that specific North Star, in this case, was maximizing those profits, they did everything he could. I mean, I think he was paid out the way he was because they knew that he was ultimately the scapegoat. Really, I don't think it was just one man's initiatives, as Tullio had mentioned earlier. It took an entire team. It took a village of individuals all following the wrong North Star that led to this. So I think now that we're shifting to a time where people are focused more on consciousness and well-being and having that North Star thing, actually thinking about those things ahead. I think those systems are coming into place where people are actually thinking about the individuals and the customers at a more emotional level than they did previously. So I think that's the big thing there, is that simply the gentleman was paid out because he did his job. And that was it. I think we've seen films like that, right? Now, mind you, if this could have caught on or continued on, let's take the 2008, for example, when the housing market crashed, and all those subprime and all those bad sales were going to keep those big banks afloat, right?
Let's talk about that. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about the Countrywide financial.
There was, But just to finish my point there was films about that where CEOs were promoted after they really hurt so many individuals. I mean, they were selling subprime loan, like it was really, really bad. It was a bad time. Now, in this case, if that was happening in this time and they determined it was bad practices, then yeah, it's a wipeout of the team. And to add my last point here is that I think they're just great marketers as well, that they play the game of messaging. So of course they're going to share that message to make sure that they're keeping their brand in a positive light. I don't think they're going to create a message.
Yeah. I'm a good marketer, but honestly, they dug themselves such a big hole that I'm dealing with like you as a young, it's my target audience. I want to get, younger people into my bank, but this is your impression. This is what I've got to go against. Exactly. It's like, you've really dug me a huge hole here. And
some of these things you just don't recover from. And I think also part of the problem is it's a little bit more systemic than that. There's too much power at the hands of one person in an organization. That's also very pervasive part of a fiat structure. We had a guest just a couple of weeks ago talking about the fiat structure of most organizations. Think about this. Not a lot of consumers are aware, or even employees are aware how CEO or executive compensations work. You could have certain incentives to achieve certain profit levels, which would cause a profitable company to, a company that's doing well with the revenue to suddenly do cuts. It's like, why did they do cuts? They were doing well. Well, because the CEO's compensation is tied to reaching a certain EBITDA, and you got to cut 10,000 people to reach that EBITDA for the quarter, right? So people don't realize how much of that goes on, and the profits, the compensation could be driven to profits, could be tied to top line. So all these things, someone's going to manipulate the system to achieve their targets, and these are hundreds of millions of dollars. We're not talking about a $20,000 bonus here. We're talking about serious money, right? Small country economy level money. So the part of the problem is there's just not enough oversight and checks and balances for this kind of thing. There's too much power in one place. It needs to be changed.
In this topic, like financial services, we're talking about like this is massive oversight, massive regulations. We've all, understand that, but yet there's, or I guess, a reason for all that because there's so much money involved here, right? And that seems to be the driving force.
And there's been a few bad actors that have taken advantage of loopholes and things like that. But it comes down to that.
Ash, what were you gonna say?
I was going to say, just for the audience too, if you want to see an example of this, and I'm sure you gentlemen have seen the show Succession. It's a satire, right? Of at the very end, when but I don't want to spoil it, but when they chose the CEO, they did. Who did they pick? They picked the person that they could have the most control over to take the initiatives of that one person in power, right? And I think the overall theme of the show was that most billionaires, most men in power, don't want to deal with someone who has an opinion. They're like, no, just do what I would tell you to do. And a lot of times their initiatives could hurt a lot of people. As if you watch that show, you see a lot of decisions were made that affected the lives of many, but they didn't care at the top. It was a battle of, who could regain power, who can control it. So as an example, if you want to see a generalized example, audience, I will look at Succession. So there's definitely a satire of what we're mentioning here of, how consolidated power and the challenges of that.
So let's dive into, you mentioned this a little earlier, Ash, Countrywide Financial. Tullio, you want to give like a recap?
Yeah, a little recap. I mean, and this was so systemic, it impacted the entire economy. Millions of people went bankrupt because of this. So anyway, they were at the time, the largest mortgage lender in the U.S., Countrywide Financial. They pretty much controlled the subprime mortgage in this space, which also contributed to the crisis. And it was, again, tied to very aggressive sales tactics that encourage risk lending practices. If you guys recall, in 2006, even 2004, 5, 6, 7, and even up to almost the end of 8, it was so easy to get a mortgage, like low interest rate, low qualifications. I mean, they were just basically giving money away, right? And it was supported because this idea of, more home buyers fuels the economy, more work gets done to fix these homes or update these homes, and there's some truth to that. But it was also extending credit to people who really weren't prepared for that kind of a debt. But these incredible, like, low interest rate with a 7-year balloon or cliff that would happen. So they just did all these practices mostly to drive more commissions. I mean, that's what drove all this. Let's figure out a way to make more money, sell more mortgages, make more money. And so the loan officers were incentivized through commission-based pay structures. In some cases, they got only commission structured. So your livelihood, your ability to pay your own mortgage is tied to your ability to sell more mortgages. So there's a lot of things that were in place that drove taking too many risks. Why? Because I'm trying to make commissions and make a living, right? So
this reminds me.
Exactly. One person's ability to make ends meet causes another person, or a trickle-down effect of thousands of people who ended up bankrupt, actually. So there was a major economic downturn. We had foreclosure, millions of homes foreclosed. There were banks that failed, financial institutions.
We spun into the recession.
I mean, it was just awful. I got impacted by that personally. It was, I went bankrupt. It was a huge impact, probably the biggest impact in my whole life. So it was, it's funny, we're talking about all the things that impacted me, but this one in particular was long lasting. I mean, it wasn't like a 6-month thing. It was a 2-3 year long thing that infected a lot of people. Oh, why? Overly aggressive sales, commission driven. Let's make money at all costs, take all kinds of risks, forget about the outcomes later, focus on now. Later, we'll worry about later. You know?
So this reminds me of a scene in the movie Ruthless People. I don't know if any of you seen that, but Judge Reinhold's character is selling the speakers to this young guy. And this is where you kind of see the power of appealing to emotions in selling can go awry when it's kind of not checked by just being good. So he pitches the guy the Dominator MX-10, and the kids ask, "What's the cost?" And he's all, "That's the best part about it. If you can't afford it, you can bleep and finance it." And the kid's all, "Yeah." And then behind the kid, Judge sees his very young guy, maybe 20. He sees his pregnant wife come in, and then you just see kind of the empathy in his character kicked in, and he's all, "You know what? Let's go look at." He had the sale of this huge, massive size of the room speakers, but he's all, "You know what? Let's go look at something a little better for you," and took him to the value purchase and all that. But this is just this very straightforward sort of commission scenario, but with a house, this is a bigger purchase. This is not, this is life-changing. This is the biggest expense people are going to make. So you do need, in some ways, a little more checks and balances on who's going to get that money.
It was crazy. I mean, do you guys remember it was like 1 year, 7-year thing where you can buy a lot more house than you can afford, and the payments were pretty low, interest rate was low. But then 7 years came around and everything went up, and then 10 years came around and everything came up, and then most people found themselves, "Oh, this is too much. I have to refinance now." But then things were collapsing and people couldn't refinance. Yeah. So
it'll drive the housing prices up, and then once the bottom was pulled out of everything, then you got all the foreclosures of people who just couldn't afford it.
Now it's the total opposite. Now the interests are way too high. It's like we went from one extreme to the other extreme, but.
Yeah, no, it was crazy because my family was heavily affected. My father was one, I want to say he was a victim, but I think he was a victim of his own craziness. And
that's
by
kind of the problem here too. It's like you want to say they're a victim, but then it's also like,
why'd you buy that house? Like, why'd you?
The truth of the matter is, I'll take full responsibility. I participated in the greed by willingly, kind of closing my eye to something and saying, "Yeah, I could do this. It'll work out." And that's what was being sold, this idea that you should take risks with them. So, you kind of know in the back of your head, you're taking a risk, but you kind of like, everybody's doing it. It's that herd mentality. Yeah. And then next thing you know, it's like, "Oh, I'm a victim because everybody else went through it." But you willingly chose to close your eyes when you did it. So lessons learned for sure. But there's no victims in these kind of scenarios. We're all willing participants. We just don't want to admit it.
So let's move on to a couple others here real quick. Goldman Sachs was accused of misleading investors with their mortgage-backed securities by failing to disclose that the securities were basically designed to fail. So they had this conflict of interest in there. And Goldman Sachs had paid like $550 million to settle the charges, but one of the largest penalties ever. But that was just pennies compared to all the money that's being changing hands there. And so, but the scandal, that damaged their reputation and highlighted, kind of this need for greater transparency. So you had that, and you've got Lehman Brothers. So they had this incentive system that was just excessive risk-taking. Bonuses and compensation were tied to short-term revenue. We just see this so often. It's that short-term approaches versus long-term stability. So this is what we're talking about with, those loans with the adjustable rates and the big balloon payments, all that stuff, anything to get people in the door. It's just a very short-term mentality there. So Lehman Brothers, this led to, heavy investments in those subprime mortgages that we were just talking about. And, Lehman Brothers doesn't exist anymore, right? So
they paid the penalties with the bailout money.
Yeah. And some of that too. Yeah. We're all paying
for it. They paid with their own money. They just gave it back to the guys who gave it to them.
So this was all a little while ago. Let's talk about something more recent. FTX, Ash.
Ooh. Yeah, this was bad. I recently watched a documentary. Allegedly there were some venture capitalists from BlackRock that were about to give Sam Friedman-Fried, what was his short name to make it easier for us? Was SF something? Whatever. At the end of the day, they were deciding to give this guy $200 million, and there was messages saved that this documentary shared that the venture capitalists who were educated, possibly Ivy League graduates of some kind, were behind the scenes discussing how much they liked Sam. And this gentleman was not looking them in the eyes, was playing League of Legends and saying a bunch of things they did not understand. And it's so crazy that there were so many individuals and celebrities that were affected by this. Simply just, he was able to convince them, give me your money and you can trust me. And I'm a super smart guy and I'll take care of everything. And you saw, as we all know, who was it? Tom Brady, poor guy, is still working, I think, because of the allegedly $600 million that he ended up losing in that scandal. Everyone looking back being like, oh, we just trusted him. Maybe,
I think
anyone that looks like crazy these days, I'm not giving you my money. That time, take my money.
Yeah, that hairstyle is going to be out now. You're not going to be
right. No, that's Sam hairstyle.
So the incentives there it was like drive up trading volume, attract more users to the platform, and then it just sort of became this house of cards, right?
Yeah.
Where they were moving money to pay for one thing to cover another.
Yes, that was so crazy. So one of their trading companies was actually failing, so they took people's money. I think there's another thing there too. I think their system was so easy to be able to give them money. It made the trades were super simple, not realizing there was no checks and balances. That's what made it so simple. So all these users are coming because they're getting a great user experience, not realizing that this gentleman's taking their money and doing what he wants with it. When the Binance CEO caught on that they were literally a house of cards, he decided to pull out. They didn't have money to return back to the investors, and that was it. The whole house collapsed. Everyone was freaking out, can't pull out, sell, error. So I recall one of my colleagues, at Zero Company, reach out saying, "Ash, I can't seem to make my FTX app work. It doesn't work. I can't get the money out."
Hey, this is an example of like another herd mindset. It's like really intelligent, smart people. Let's just play this out.
Yeah.
Someone comes to you, knocks on your door, right? Stranger, and says, hey, if you give me $200, I'm going to come back to you with $400 because I built this whole cool system that allows you to make money really easily. And I'm going to control it. I'm going to have the wallet. But it's built on this idea of blockchain where you have control and transparency and you own the wallet. But for this transaction, I'm going to control it. I'm going to have complete flexibility to do whatever I want with the money, but I'm going to return you $400. And by the way, there's no oversight or governance controlling any of this. Would you give that person $200? No way. But somehow thousands of people, smart people, got convinced that this was okay. Hand over the money to a company that has no governance, no regulation, and you have no visibility, no transparency. You don't own the wallet of that money, which is the promise of blockchain, that you're supposed to own the wallet. You're supposed to be the custodian. They're the custodian of it. You basically hand it over, close your eyes, and hope it's all going to work out. And millions and billions of dollars were done this way. I don't understand how this happened.
Well, Shaq did it.
I think it's just celebrities. They have this. They said I can do it. And Tom Brady. I don't know.
Well, Shaq was on that commercial. The gentleman from
Tom Brady
trying to get out, Tom Brady, and then we had the guy from Curb Your Enthusiasm. I forget his name.
Right.
So I make that joke.
All these celebrities are doing it. Obviously, they're smart. They figured it out.
Yeah, I think this is a good example, though. We've why financial services are so regulated, and they've got just volumes and volumes of regulation, and then now we're getting into this new area with cryptocurrency and stuff like that, where everything's a little bit new and different, but same people are going to come along and develop the new Ponzi scheme or new sort of scenario, because incentives kind of end up pushing them toward that. There's always just fill in the pocket. People all on the chain, even the participants.
Yeah. Can I just say this? This episode's about systems that have led to things like this, and I think what's more cringe that my generation would use is the fact that if you don't get your systems right, those systems come out to light, and how embarrassing when people see, wait, this was your system, really? I know going back to the FTX example, when the systems came out to light, there was a lot of stories that we don't need to share with our audience that were a little inappropriate, but that all came out to light, right? All the negative things they were doing behind the scenes, even in their personal lives that were connected to the business, was for everyone to see, and how embarrassing. Now, I'm sure Sam could look back while he's in jail and be like, ugh, I didn't want people to know that we were doing that. Right. And I think there's a lesson in that, right? Are there things in your business now or systems you have in place now that if you could look and if you could reflect and be like, I don't want anyone to know about that. Oh, people don't have to know about that. Well, just know you're going down a path that when that thing caused a problem or a ripple of some kind in your business, people then want to know, how did that happen? Oh, you were doing that. And that's where it becomes a little uncomfortable for you as a business owner or a visionary or so on. I
think that's a really good point. Let's kind of go through some of the kind of lessons learned here, maybe on some of this. And so, like you were saying there, I see consciousness, evolving all around us. We see it. We see businesses evolving, becoming higher conscious. And at some point, that's where you're leading to, is being these authentic, sort of transparent companies, right? And so when things are going to go sideways now, they're going to go sideways and everything's coming out, because that's just the way we're headed. And so that's one of the key issues we kind of see in some of this, is that lack of transparency. So we saw it with FTX, Lehman Brothers was another one, the lack of transparency. So we're seeing that as one of the traits in a bad system, right? Is this sort of lack of transparency, where someone can hide something, where a bad practice can just be, sort of swept under the rug or hidden and ingrained into the system. That's one of the things. What else comes to mind that we've talked about? I know, Tullio, you mentioned early on, one of the things was the aggressive sales and the high pressure sales tactics, right?
Yeah, I think unrealistic goals and the kind of environment that pushes superstar kind of mindset, hero level kind of work. It's not designed to encourage collaboration and connection. It's designed to strive to be the top, the very best, right? So it's
at one specific thing.
Yeah, and it's pulling on a lever. It's pulling on a lever, right? We all have a desire to be the best that we can be. We all have a desire to belong to something greater than ourselves. We all want to make an impact. There's an innate human desire to make an impact. So it's pulling at that lever to want to make an impact, but it's driven towards sales and revenues and commissions. But the underlying desire, the psychological need is I want to make an impact. So it's very easy to pull on that lever and get people focused on it. But it's single dimensional, right? It's, it's like you do that, but you also have a need to have meaning behind what you're doing. And that comes with connection and consciousness and understanding that you're part of a collective, that there's something greater than yourself that you belong to. So when those pieces are missing, then you have an imbalance. So just the same way lack of transparency is a red flag, when there's a lack of like belonging to something greater or meaningful connections involved, and it's very singular focused, that should be a red flag as well. So these, but the good news is, how do you know this? Now we do, right? These things happen and we learn from them, hopefully. But it always comes down to a simple thing. Does this create connection, or does it separate me from everybody else, right? That's like the idea of a cancer. What's a cancerous cell? It's a good cell that decided to be different because it thinks it's better and separates itself. And then a bunch of other ones decide to separate themselves too. And now you've got a cancer, right? So it's the same idea. Do I want to stay connected to the rest of humanity and do the right thing? Or do I want to separate myself, be the elite, be awesome, be the best at all costs? Because the latter will cause these kinds of problems. So there's definitely a lack of emotional intelligence that comes into play with these kinds of pressure tactics.
And I think that's kind of the key there a little bit with. So I guess I don't really mind aggressive sales efforts, but if it's not looking out for the customer's best interests is where you get in the problem. So it's like, okay, if you want to work really hard at sales, that's great, but always be looking out for the customer's interests. I think that's kind of the key there. What we didn't see with Wells Fargo and Countrywide, right? It had no concern about the customers, didn't care what accounts Tullio got or loans, that they were giving out. They had there's all just a short-term, what's in it for me commission with no care for, like you said, your fellow human being there. So if you're really hard at working at sales and really good at it, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, I think, when it's just at all costs. And
and that's the thing. If you've got something that solves a problem, you should be absolutely gung-ho evangelizing that all over it, because it's something that's benefiting other people. And there's not, that's the salesperson's dream come true, to go actually sell something that creates real value. You spend 24 hours a day doing that because you actually have an impact, positive impact.
I think that's key too. So it's like incentive structures that promote ethical behavior, but it's focused on maybe not just that short-term gain, right? It's that long-term consequence, so I'm feeling good about the transaction. You're feeling good about the transaction, right? So it's not just, I'm selling you that big, huge speaker system you don't need. And I got an extra $500 in my pocket or something from that. I'm not feeling good about myself.
Yeah, it's very powerful stuff, because it's not just the customer, the employees get affected. And I think you made a great point about, if you're trying to be the best at all costs. I personally came from an environment where it was a pressure cooker. And I think the person that managed that, hey, I want to be best at all costs, they enjoyed the validation they were getting from the customers, because that environment was being praised for its performance. But then when it came back to the employees,
it's the definition of best. What's best mean?
Right.
So,
best for who?
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. And I don't think there was ever a gauge or a metric of when is enough. Right. So when some really big things were happening, I think there was employees that didn't even know the value of some of the things that they had accomplished. And I think I didn't know my value until I had my Zero company interview, and I was able to present, hey, I did this thing. Is this something? And then immediately I remember everyone thought like, wow, that is something. But at the time I had no idea, because it was no validation. And the coaching to my mentor at the time was that you don't need validation. You don't need anyone to tell you good job. Just go do it and just keep doing it. And when I started to not be able to perform at the level that I was supposed to, it all came back on me. What's wrong? Is there something wrong with you? Is there my appreciation for the job I had was being questioned? Things like that just kept boom, boom, boom. And what ended up happening was that, when opportunities arise, and I said, wait, there are people that value what I've been able to accomplish, and we'll say, good job. Let me go just test it out. Well, that environment ended up losing what could have been a great employee, right? And I ended up taking that value to somewhere else where they actually valued it, right? So,
Ash, I think you hinted on this a little bit, is this culture of fear and retaliation is one of these other traits we see, like Wells Fargo, FTX. This is where you have like those whistleblower complaints being pushed aside, where if you're dragged into the room, so there's this culture of fear and retaliation. So I think that might be another one of these traits that we see in these systems.
Yes.
There is this opposite side of it that's very dark, disconnecting, and like I said, there with that Wells Fargo whip just
Oh, and Tullio made the great point. I think the thing he said is this making me more connected, or is this isolating me more? And as he was saying that, I was like, wait, I could look back. No, I was for sure being isolated more. And then that would, a lot of the things I didn't understand, like, why am I so depressed? Why am I so anxious? Why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling that way? Not being able to tie it at the time to my environment, and, not feeling appreciated. So it's very powerful stuff to now, I now have that gauge. Everything I'm doing is making me more connected to the individuals around me, or am I isolating? That's my gauge now.
And the hoax is to think that you can't be successful at sales or generate revenue and be profitable and make lots of money and create wealth,
or be good
without being aggressive at all costs. It's not, that's the hoax. You can do that and still be conscious and take care of people. So it goes down to, if you're going to sell a product, make sure the product creates value for the end users. And if you're in sales and all the pressure's on you to go make something happen and the product's not up to snuff, put the pressure back on the product. People say, hey, give me something that creates more value, because I could sell the heck out of it, and it'll be a long-term sale instead of one where the person buys it and then has a regret and it ruins your reputation. Like, it has to be a symbiotic relationship. The value has to be commensurate with the aggressive effort. You can't have one without the other. That's where things fall short, is when you have all the aggression on the sales side, but you don't have a product that's up to snuff, so you're not meeting the needs of your customers. When you have something valuable, you should go to sell the heck out of it, and make tons of money and be wealthy, because that creates opportunities for everybody. But that's making a meaningful impact, not just an impact, and it's creating more connection. So it always comes down to making sure you've got your customer's interest at hand first.
Yeah. So I go back to that. I mean, that Ruthless People movie scenario I gave out, and I love that we're talking about ruthless people as the title here. I'm glad I thought of that, because that's what it comes down to. And part of that scene, I remember now, the kid was like, hey, honey, this is a guy I feel like I can finally trust that's going to help me. And you saw there was like this connection, and Judge Reinhold character saw that there was this kid had this connection with him, and he was just like, kind of just melted right then and saw the whole scenario and is like, let me show you where the value is in our store, and took him to that. And he couldn't be one of those ruthless people in there, but it was this sale that he'll be happy about. He'll get some commission, but at the end of the day, he's not selling his soul, for the Dominator MX, big commission that he had in there. So let me just recap here real quick some of the traits we saw. So we had like that aggressive sale targets and pressure that didn't have the customer's best interests in mind. Incentive structures that promote unethical behavior, that was another trait. Lack of transparency, we talked about that. The culture of fear and retaliation, we mentioned that as another trait. We didn't mention conflict of interest, so we saw that a lot too. I think with like FTX, you saw that. With Goldman Sachs, you saw this conflict of interest in play there, where money is involved. Basically, it's like people sneaking in there with this conflict of interest to make themselves more money. So that was another trait in there. But I think those are some things we can take away from this episode of Bad Systems in Financial Services. So that's it for today. Reminder, on Tuesdays, we do our deep dives like this. Wednesdays, we have our short 10-minute Empathy Expansion Kit episodes. Thursdays, we have a guest in, and we'll catch you on the next Bliss Business Podcast.